I found out my wife was secretly turning my daughter into her full-time maid and working her to collapse while I was away. I decided to catch her in the act. I travel for work 3 days a week and thought my new wife, Bethany, was taking good care of my 14-year-old daughter, Jade, while I was gone. Bethany had 2 kids of her own, twin boys who were 12, and she always talked about how important it was to blend our families properly. Jade needs to feel like this is her home too, she'd say, whenever I worried about the adjustment. What I didn't know was that the second my car left the driveway, Bethany turned my daughter into unpaid labor. Jade was responsible for all the cooking, all the cleaning, all the laundry. Bethany would sit on the couch playing on her phone while Jade scrubbed floors on her hands and knees. If Jade missed a spot, Bethany would dump a glass of juice on the floor and make her clean it again. "This is how you learn to do things properly," she'd say. The boys were told they never had to lift a finger because Jade was there to serve them. They'd throw their clothes on the floor and laugh when Jade had to pick them up. They'd demand snacks at midnight, and Bethany would wake Jade up to make them. "Part of being a good sister," Bethany would say. Jade never told me because Bethany threatened her. "Your dad is finally happy again after your mom died. Do you really want to ruin that for him? Do you want him to be alone forever because you're too lazy to help around the house?" She convinced Jade that telling me would destroy our family and that I'd resent her for it. When I was home on weekends, Bethany would make a big show of doing housework herself and telling the boys to help out. She'd give Jade breaks and take her shopping. It looked like perfect stepmother behavior. But she'd whisper to Jade in the car, "Remember, this is only when he's here. Don't get comfortable." I started noticing things, though. Jade was always exhausted. She was losing weight. Her grades were dropping. When I asked what was wrong, Bethany would jump in. "Teenage years are so hard. She's probably just adjusting to all the changes. I've been trying to help her, but you know how teenagers are." Then came the week Jade got the flu. I was in Denver for a conference when the school called Bethany to pick her up. Jade had 102 fever and could barely stand. Bethany brought her home and immediately put her to work. Made her clean both boys' bedrooms while she could barely walk. Made her do 3 loads of laundry. Made her cook dinner for everyone. When Jade threw up from the fever and exertion, Bethany made her clean that up too. "You made the mess, you clean it," she said. Jade passed out in the laundry room. Bethany left her there on the floor for 2 hours. The only reason I found out was because my neighbor Kevin saw it happen. He'd come over to return a tool he borrowed and looked through the window when no one answered the door. He saw Jade collapsed on the floor and Bethany stepping over her to get to the kitchen. He called me immediately. I drove 6 hours straight home. Didn't tell Bethany I was coming. When I walked in at 2 in the morning, Jade was mopping the kitchen floor while burning with fever. Her hands were shaking so bad she could barely hold the mop. Bethany was sitting at the table eating ice cream. "She made a mess earlier," Bethany said when she saw me. "She needs to learn responsibility." I looked at my daughter. She'd lost at least 15 pounds. Her hands were red and cracked from cleaning products. She had dark circles under her eyes that looked like bruises. "Jade, go to bed," I said. "Now." Bethany stood up. "She hasn't finished her chores. If we let her slack off because she's feeling a little under the weather, she'll never learn discipline." That's when Jade collapsed again, right there in front of me. As I caught her, she was mumbling apologies. "I'm sorry. I'll finish. Please don't be mad at Dad. I'll be better." I carried Jade to her room and came back downstairs. Bethany was already spinning the story. "She's been so dramatic lately. I've been trying to teach her basic life skills, but she resists everything. I think she might be acting out because she doesn't want me here." I pulled out my phone and called Kevin, put him on speaker. "Tell my wife what you saw today." Kevin described everything. Jade is on the floor. Bethany is ignoring her. The boys were ordering Jade around like a servant while she could barely stand. Bethany tried to interrupt, but I told her to shut up. Then I went to the boys' room and woke them up. "Tell me what Jade does when I'm not here." They thought it was funny. They told me everything. How she was their maid. How Mom said she had to do whatever they wanted. How she wasn't allowed to eat until everyone else was done. How she slept on the laundry room floor sometimes because she was too tired to walk to her room after finishing her chores at 2 in the morning. Bethany stood there with her mouth open. I pointed at the stairs. "Pack a bag. You're leaving my house tonight." Bethany's face shifted from shock to indignation. "You can't just—" "30 minutes," I said. "If you're not out by then, I'm calling the police." She stared at me like I'd grown a second head. Her mouth opened and closed twice before any words came out. "Stanley, you're being completely unreasonable. If you just let me explain." "I don't want explanations. I want you out." Something in my face must have registered because she took a step back. Her hands came up like she was trying to calm a dangerous animal. "The boys need stability. You're overreacting to normal discipline. Every parent makes their kids do chores." I was already pulling out my phone. My brother answered on the second ring. "Tom, I need a favor. Can Bethany stay at your place for a few days?" Bethany's eyes went wide. "Stanley, please. Think about what you're doing to our family." Tom asked what was going on. I gave him the shortest version I could manage. Found out she's been abusing Jade, making her work like a slave. Jade collapsed twice tonight from fever and exhaustion. I need her out of my house right now." "Jesus," Tom said. "Yeah, she can stay here, but only until she finds somewhere else." "That's fine. She'll be there in an hour." I hung up and looked at Bethany. "Go pack, now." She stood there another few seconds, then turned and went upstairs. I heard her footsteps in the bedroom above me, drawers opening and closing. I went to check on Jade. She was sitting on her bed, still in the clothes she'd been mopping in. Her face was flushed with fever, and she was shaking. Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause problems. I can do better. I promise. You didn't cause anything. I sat next to her and put my arm around her shoulders. She felt like she was burning up. None of this is your fault. You understand me? But the boys need their mom, and you were so happy, and I just... Stop. I pulled her closer. Jade, listen to me. What Bethany did to you was wrong. It was abuse. You don't owe her anything. You don't owe me anything except being honest, which you couldn't do because she threatened you. This is on her, not you. She started crying. Not the quiet tears from before, but real sobs that shook her whole body. I held her and let her cry. Upstairs, I could hear Bethany moving around, probably taking her time to make some kind of point. After a few minutes, Jade's crying slowed down. She wiped her face with her sleeve. What's going to happen now? Right now, I'm taking you to the hospital. You need a doctor to look at you. I don't want to go to the hospital. I know, but you're really sick. Your fever is too high and you're dehydrated. We need to make sure you're okay. She nodded, but didn't look happy about it. I heard Bethany coming down the stairs with a suitcase. She appeared in Jade's doorway. I'm leaving. But this isn't over, Stanley. You're going to regret this. The only thing I regret is not seeing what you were doing sooner. Get out. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say more, then looked at Jade and seemed to think better of it. She left. I heard the front door close a minute later. I helped Jade stand up. She could barely walk on her own. I ended up carrying her to the car and setting her in the passenger seat. She leaned her head against the window and closed her eyes. The emergency room was 15 minutes away. I drove faster than I should have. Jade didn't say anything the whole way there. When we got to the hospital, I carried her inside because she couldn't make it on her own. The nurse at the front desk took one look at Jade and called for a doctor immediately. They got her into a room within 5 minutes. A doctor came in right after. He was older, maybe 60, with gray hair and tired eyes. What's going on? He asked, looking at Jade. I explained about the fever, the collapse, how long she'd been sick. He examined her while I talked, checked her temperature, listened to her breathing, looked at her hands. How long has she been losing weight? He asked. I don't know. A few months, maybe? I travel for work and didn't notice until tonight. He pressed his lips together. She's severely dehydrated and malnourished. The flu on top of that is dangerous. We're admitting her. She needs IV fluids and monitoring. Relief hit me so hard I almost sat down. Okay, thank you. They moved Jade to a regular room and got her hooked up to an IV. She fell asleep almost immediately. I sat in the chair next to her bed and watched the fluid drip into her arm. The same doctor came back about an hour later. He pulled up a chair across from me. I need to ask you some questions about Jade's home situation. My stomach dropped. Okay. The weight loss is significant. At least 15 pounds in a few months. That's not normal for a healthy teenager. And these burns on her hands, they're from harsh chemicals. Cleaning products, most likely. Used repeatedly without protection. He paused. What's been going on at home? I told him everything. The whole story from start to finish. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. I'm required to file a report with Child Protective Services, he said finally. What you're describing constitutes child abuse and neglect. They'll open an investigation. I understand. I want them to investigate. I want this documented. He nodded. You did the right thing bringing her here. If she'd gone much longer without treatment, this could have become life-threatening. He stood up. I'll file the report tonight. CPS will probably contact you tomorrow. After he left, I sat there looking at Jade. Her face was so thin. I could see her cheekbones in a way I never had before. Her hands were wrapped in bandages now, covering the chemical burns. Dark circles under her eyes made her look years older. This had been happening in my house. While I was in hotels in other cities, thinking everything was fine. While I was on conference calls and client meetings, my daughter was worked to collapse. While I was sleeping peacefully in airport hotels, she was sleeping on the laundry room floor because she was too exhausted to make it to her bed. I pulled out my phone and looked at the time. 3 in the morning. I should call someone, tell someone what was happening. But who? My mom would freak out. Tom already knew the basics. Kevin had done enough by calling me in the first place. My phone buzzed. A text from Bethany. We need to talk about this like adults. You're making a huge mistake. I blocked her number. Another text came through from a number I didn't recognize. Then I realized she was texting from the boy's phone. Please, Stanley, I love you. We can work through this. Jade is just going through a phase and I was trying to help her grow up. Don't throw away our marriage over a misunderstanding. I blocked that number too. Jade stirred in her sleep, made a small sound like she was having a bad dream. I moved my chair closer to her bed and took her hand carefully, avoiding the bandaged parts. She settled down. I wasn't going to sleep tonight. Couldn't even if I wanted to. So I sat there and watched my daughter breathe and tried not to think about all the times I'd missed. All the signs I hadn't seen. All the moments I could have stopped this if I'd just paid better attention. The next morning, Jade woke up around 7. She looked around the hospital room confused for a second, then saw me and relaxed a little. How do you feel? I asked. Better. Less hot. Her voice was rough from sleep. A nurse came in to check her vitals, said everything looked good and the doctor would be by later. After she left, Jade looked at me. Did Bethany really leave? Yeah, she's staying with Uncle Tom temporarily. Are you getting divorced? Yes. She nodded slowly. Okay. There was a knock on the door. A woman in her 40s came in wearing business casual clothes and carrying a folder. Good morning. I'm Courtney Gillespie from Child Protective Services. I need to speak with both of you about what's been happening. My phone started buzzing in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw Bethany calling from yet another number. I sent it to voicemail. It immediately started ringing again. Same number. I turned the phone off completely. Courtney noticed. Is that the stepmother? Yeah. She won't stop calling. Don't answer. Everything should go through lawyers from this point forward. She sat down and opened her folder. I need to interview you both separately. Mr. Mosley, would you mind waiting outside while I talk to Jade first? I looked at Jade. She nodded that it was okay. I went out into the hallway and paced for 20 minutes until Courtney came to get me. She interviewed me for almost an hour, asked detailed questions about our home life, my work schedule, when I first noticed problems, what the boys had said. She took notes the whole time. When she was done, she closed her folder and looked at me. Based on what I've heard from both of you and the medical evidence, I'm opening a formal investigation into Bethany's treatment of Jade. The evidence is clear that abuse occurred. You did exactly the right thing by removing her from the home immediately and getting Jade medical care. What happens now? I'll complete my investigation over the next few weeks. I'll need to interview the twin boys and Bethany as well. But I can tell you right now that my recommendation will be that Bethany have no unsupervised contact with Jade moving forward. After Courtney left, I called my boss. Explained I had a family emergency and needed time off. He didn't ask questions, just told me to take 2 weeks and call if I needed more. Then he said something that made my chest tight. Your daughter comes first. Work will be here when you get back. I sat back down next to Jade's bed. She was awake but quiet. I need to figure out my work situation, I told her. I can't keep traveling 3 days a week. Not anymore. I don't want you to lose your job because of me. You're not making me do anything. I'm choosing this. I'm your dad. You're supposed to come first and I lost sight of that. It won't happen again. My phone, which I turned back on, started buzzing again. Bethany. I let it ring 15 times before I finally answered. What? She was crying. Stanley, please. I was just trying to teach her responsibility. You're misunderstanding everything. I love Jade. I would never hurt her. You made her work while she had a fever. You made her sleep on the laundry room floor. You starved her and burned her hands and threatened her into silence. That's not teaching responsibility. That's abuse. I was too strict sometimes, I admit that. But abuse? That's such an extreme word. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. Please don't throw away our marriage. We're done, Bethany. Get a lawyer. Stanley, wait. I hung up, blocked the new number. Then I called Matthew Robertson, the divorce attorney my colleague had recommended months ago for a different case. His assistant said he could see me the next day at 2. Document everything, Matthew said when I explained the situation. Keep all text messages. Don't delete anything. Don't communicate with her except through lawyers from now on, and whatever you do, don't let her guilt you into backing down. Child abusers are experts at manipulation. I promised I would follow his advice. Then I turned my phone off again and sat with Jade. She was looking out the window at the parking lot below. What are you thinking about? I asked. I was so scared you'd be mad at me for ruining your marriage. Jade, look at me. I waited until she turned her head. You didn't ruin anything. Bethany did. She made choices, bad choices that hurt you. None of this is your fault. Not one single bit. She nodded, but I could tell she didn't fully believe me yet. That was okay. We had time now. Time for her to heal. Time for me to prove that I meant what I said. Time to build something better than what we'd had. The doctor came back in the afternoon and said Jade could go home the next morning if her vitals stayed stable. He gave me prescriptions for her flu and cream for her hands. A detailed medical report for the legal case. Instructions for follow-up appointments. That night, I slept in the chair next to Jade's bed. It was uncomfortable and my back hurt, but I wasn't leaving her alone. Not tonight. Maybe not for a long time. The morning they discharged Jade, Alonzo came in with a folder thick enough to stop a door. He sat down next to the bed and opened it, showing me page after page of documentation. Medical photographs of her hands with the chemical burns measured and cataloged. Weight charts showing the 15-pound drop over 3 months. Blood work indicating malnutrition. Notes about the untreated flu that had progressed to dangerous levels. He explained each page in detail, making sure I understood what everything meant for the legal case Matthew was building. This wasn't just a doctor's report. This was evidence that could put Bethany in prison. Alonzo prescribed antibiotics for the lingering infection in Jade's lungs and gave me 3 tubes of medicated cream for her hands. He scheduled follow-up appointments for the next month and wrote detailed instructions about her recovery. Then he looked at me and said something I won't forget. He told me he'd been a pediatrician for 20 years, and he could always tell the difference between kids who got hurt by accident and kids who got hurt on purpose. Jade was the second kind. I thanked him and carried the folder out to the car like it was made of glass. The house felt different when we pulled into the driveway. Empty somehow, even before I opened the door. Inside, I knew immediately that Bethany had cleared out. The boys' rooms were stripped bare. Their beds, their toys, their clothes, everything gone except the furniture that came with the house. The kitchen had half the dishes missing. The living room was missing the TV and the expensive sound system Bethany had insisted we buy. I walked through each room documenting what was gone with my phone camera, just like Matthew told me to do. Then I went to my bedroom and opened the jewelry box where I kept my late wife's things. Empty. The pearl necklace her grandmother gave her. The diamond earrings I bought for our 10th anniversary. The gold bracelet Jade was supposed to inherit when she turned 18. All of it gone. I checked the bank account on my phone. Bethany had withdrawn $8,000, exactly half of what we had in our joint account. I took pictures of the empty jewelry box, the bank statement, everything. Added it all to the folder Alonzo gave me. Evidence kept stacking up like firewood. Kevin showed up an hour later carrying a container of soup from the deli on Main Street. The same chicken noodle soup Jade used to get every time she was sick when she was little. He set it on the counter and asked how she was doing. I told him she was resting upstairs, still exhausted from everything. Kevin sat down at the kitchen table and rubbed his face with both hands. He said he'd noticed Jade looking tired for months, noticed her losing weight, noticed how she never seemed to smile anymore when she got off the school bus, but he'd assumed it was normal teenage stuff, growing pains, adjustment issues from the new family situation. Now he felt sick knowing what was really happening while he was watching from next door and doing nothing. I told him he did more than most people would have by calling me that day. He saw something wrong and he acted. That phone call saved my daughter. Kevin nodded, but I could tell he was still beating himself up about it. He asked if there was anything else he could do. I said just being available to talk to the lawyers if they needed his statement again. He promised he would, and left the soup with instructions to heat it slowly, so it wouldn't scald Jade's throat. I brought the soup upstairs and found Jade sitting on her bed looking at her hands. The medicated cream made them shiny, and they still looked painful even though Alonzo said they were healing well. I sat down next to her with the soup container and told her we needed to talk. She immediately tensed up like she was expecting bad news. I said this was important, and I needed her to really hear me. None of what happened was her fault. Not one bit of it. Bethany manipulated her, threatened her, made her believe that protecting me was more important than protecting herself. But that was a lie. A cruel lie designed to keep Jade quiet while Bethany abused her. Protecting me was never Jade's job. She was the kid. I was the parent. I was supposed to protect her and I failed. She started shaking her head, trying to interrupt, but I kept going. I told her that Bethany was an expert at manipulation. She fooled me completely, made me think everything was fine, made me think she was taking good care of my daughter. But she was torturing Jade instead, and I should have seen it sooner. That guilt was mine to carry, not hers. Jade's face crumpled and she started crying. Really crying for the first time since I found her on the kitchen floor. Not the quiet tears she'd shed in the hospital. This was deep, body-shaking sobs that sounded like they were tearing out of her chest. I pulled her against me and held her while she cried into my shirt. She kept saying she was sorry between sobs. Sorry for not telling me. Sorry for letting it happen. Sorry for ruining my marriage. I just held her tighter and told her she had nothing to be sorry for. Nothing at all. The school counselor called while Jade was sleeping off the crying. She said Jade had missed 3 days and they were concerned. I explained the situation as calmly as I could. The abuse, the hospital stay, the CPS investigation, the divorce proceedings that were starting. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then the counselor said she wished she'd known sooner. She'd noticed Jade's grades dropping over the past 2 months, noticed her falling asleep in class, noticed how withdrawn she'd become. But every time she called home to discuss it, Bethany explained it away as normal adjustment issues for a blended family. Said Jade was just being dramatic about having to share attention with the twin boys. The counselor had believed her because Bethany sounded so reasonable and concerned. Now she felt terrible for not pushing harder. She offered to set up support services for Jade, counseling through the school, academic accommodations while she recovered, a safe person Jade could talk to if she needed help. I accepted everything she offered and thanked her for caring enough to call. Matthew scheduled a meeting for the next afternoon at his office downtown. I brought everything. The medical reports from Alonzo, the photos of the house showing what Bethany took, the bank statements, Kevin's written statement about what he witnessed, photos of Jade's room compared to the boys' rooms before Bethany cleaned them out. Matthew spread it all across his conference table and went through each piece methodically. He took notes in a legal pad, asking questions about dates and times and specific incidents. When he finished, he sat back and told me this was one of the clearest child abuse cases he'd seen in 15 years of family law. We had medical documentation. We had witness testimony. We had photographic evidence. We had a CPS investigation that was going to back up everything Jade said. The emergency custody protection was going to be easy to get. Bethany wouldn't be allowed near Jade without supervision until a judge decided otherwise. He started drafting the divorce papers right there while I sat across from him. Sole custody of Jade, restraining order, asset division that accounted for what Bethany stole. He explained the process would take months to finalize, but the emergency orders would go through fast. Within days, probably. The documented abuse and active CPS involvement meant judges took this stuff seriously. We filed everything the next morning at the courthouse. Matthew walked me through the process, explaining each form and what it meant. Petition for divorce, custody motion, restraining order application, financial disclosures showing what Bethany took from the accounts. It felt surreal signing my name over and over, officially ending a marriage I'd thought would last forever. The clerk stamped everything and said the emergency hearing was scheduled for the following week. Matthew told me to expect Bethany's lawyer to contact him soon. They always did. They'd try to negotiate, try to make this go away quietly. But we weren't negotiating on Jade's safety. Not for anything. Bethany's lawyer called Matthew 2 days later. Matthew put it on speaker so I could hear. The lawyer suggested joint custody with Bethany getting Jade every other weekend. He claimed Bethany was simply teaching Jade life skills and responsibility. Said I was too permissive as a parent, and Jade needed structure. Said the whole thing was blown out of proportion by an overprotective father who couldn't handle his daughter being disciplined. Matthew let him finish his pitch. Then he calmly listed the evidence we had. Medical reports documenting abuse, witness testimony, CPS investigation findings, photos of chemical burns on a 14-year-old's hands. He said this wasn't a negotiation about parenting styles. This was a criminal child abuse case that happened to be playing out in family court first. If Bethany's lawyer wanted to keep pretending this was about chores and life skills, we'd be happy to let a judge decide. The lawyer got quiet, said he'd talk to his client. Matthew hung up and told me this was standard manipulation. They were testing to see if I'd back down to avoid a fight, but we weren't backing down. Not even a little. Courtney finished her investigation a week after we filed for divorce. She called to tell me her findings before the official report went to the court. Based on her interviews with Jade, with me, with Kevin, and with the medical evidence, she determined that abuse had occurred. Severe abuse involving forced labor, physical harm, emotional manipulation, and neglect of medical needs. Her recommendation was that Bethany should have only supervised visitation with Jade, no overnight stays, no unsupervised contact, mandatory parenting classes before any custody expansion could be considered. She said Jade's testimony had been consistent and detailed. The medical evidence backed up everything she said. Kevin's witness statement corroborated the conditions in the house. This wasn't a case of conflicting stories. This was clear-cut abuse with documentation. Her report would be filed with the court in 2 days and would become part of the official record. I thanked her and felt something loosen in my chest. Validation. Official validation that I wasn't crazy, that what happened to Jade was real and serious and wrong. The question of what to do about Grayson and Linus kept me up at night. I'd spent a year trying to be a good stepfather to them, taking them to soccer practice, helping with homework, treating them like they were my own kids, but they'd laughed at Jade while she suffered. They'd been taught by their mother that some people existed to serve them. They were victims of Bethany's twisted parenting, but they'd also participated in Jade's abuse. Matthew said I had no legal obligation to them now. They weren't my kids. I wasn't adopting them. The divorce would sever any legal relationship I had with them, but I could request updates on their welfare through CPS if I was concerned about how Bethany was treating them. I thought about it for days. Finally decided I'd ask Courtney to keep an eye on them. Not because I wanted them back in my life, not because I forgave what they did, but because no kid deserved to be raised by someone like Bethany, and maybe someone watching would prevent them from becoming the next generation of abusers. The first night after Courtney finished her report, Jade woke up screaming at 3 a.m. I ran to her room and found her sitting up in bed, soaked in sweat, frantically looking around like she was trying to figure out where she was. She was breathing hard, and her hands were shaking. When she saw me, she started apologizing. She said she'd fallen asleep before finishing the laundry, and Bethany was going to be so mad. I sat on the edge of her bed and told her Bethany wasn't here anymore, that she was safe, that there was no laundry to finish. It took her a few minutes to calm down and remember where she was. She cried and said she kept having the same dream where she was cleaning and cleaning, but the house kept getting dirtier, and Bethany was standing over her saying she'd never be good enough. The nightmares happened 3 more times that week. Each time she woke up thinking she'd failed at some chore and was going to get punished. I started sleeping with my door open so I could hear her faster. On the 5th night, I heard her whimpering and went in before she fully woke up. I sat with her until she settled back down. The next morning, I called around looking for a therapist who specialized in child abuse cases. Most places had waiting lists that were weeks or months long. Finally, I found Diane Peterson, who had an opening because another family had just moved out of state. I explained what happened to Jade, and Diane said she could see us that same week. Jade's first session with Diane lasted an hour. I sat in the waiting room and tried not to imagine what my daughter was saying in there. When they came out, Jade looked tired, but also a little lighter somehow. Diane told me privately that Jade had significant trauma to work through, but she was resilient and willing to do the work. We scheduled weekly sessions every Thursday at 4. Diane said the nightmares were normal and would probably continue for a while, but they'd work on coping strategies to help Jade feel safe even when she was asleep. I had a video call with my boss the following Monday to talk about my work situation. I explained that I needed to be home more for family reasons, that my daughter had been through something serious and needed me present. My boss asked if I could do mostly remote work with just 1 travel day per week instead of 3. I said yes immediately. He told me it would mean a pay cut, probably around 15%, because the travel was part of what justified my current salary. I didn't even hesitate. I told him Jade's safety was worth any amount of money, that I'd make it work. He approved the change starting the following month. My mom called that evening after I texted her about the new schedule, and she offered to stay with Jade on the 1 day per week I still had to travel. She said she could drive up every Wednesday evening and stay until I got back Thursday night. I felt relief wash over me because I didn't want Jade to be alone yet, not when she was still having nightmares and processing everything. My mom said she should have been around more before all this happened, that maybe she would have noticed something was wrong. I told her we all missed the signs because Bethany was good at hiding what she was doing. 2 weeks after the divorce filing, I started getting texts from mutual friends asking what was going on with me and Bethany. I didn't respond at first because I was trying to follow Matthew's advice about not discussing the case. Then I got a call from my friend Jason saying he'd seen Bethany's posts on social media and wanted to hear my side. I asked what post he was talking about. He told me to check her page. I opened the app for the first time in weeks and found that Bethany had written this long post about how I'd abandoned her and her children without warning, how she'd tried so hard to blend our families, but I turned on her the moment things got difficult. She painted herself as this devoted stepmother who loved Jade like her own daughter, and she said I was using false accusations to win a custody battle. She said the boys were devastated and confused about why their stepdad had suddenly disappeared from their lives. The post had dozens of comments from people saying they were sorry she was going through this and that I sounded like a terrible person. I felt my blood pressure spike reading it. I wanted to write my own post explaining what really happened, showing people the hospital records and the photos of Jade's hands. I wanted everyone to know the truth. I called Matthew before I did anything. I told him about Bethany's social media campaign and asked if I should defend myself publicly. He said absolutely not. He told me to stay off social media entirely and let the legal evidence speak for itself in court. He said Bethany's public complaints might actually help our case because they showed her lack of remorse and her continued manipulation attempts. He said judges didn't like it when one parent tried to wage a publicity war during custody proceedings. He told me the people who really mattered would see the truth when it came out in court, and the people who believed Bethany's version without hearing mine probably weren't real friends anyway. I logged out of social media and didn't look at it again. 3 days later, Matthew called with good news. The court had granted our temporary restraining order and emergency custody order. It meant Bethany could not contact Jade at all until the full hearing in 6 weeks. No calls, no texts, no showing up at the school or our house. If she violated it, she could be arrested. I felt relief for the first time since this whole thing started. There was legal protection in place now, something official that said Jade deserved to be safe from Bethany. I told Jade about the order that evening, and she actually smiled a little. She said she'd been scared Bethany would show up somewhere and try to talk to her. Now she knew that couldn't happen. At Jade's next appointment with Alonzo, he examined her hands carefully under the light. He said they were healing, but the chemical burns had been severe enough that she might have permanent scarring, especially on her palms where the skin had been most damaged. He showed me the areas where the tissue hadn't regenerated normally. Every time I watched Jade wince when she wrote something or picked up a glass, I felt rage at Bethany all over again. Those scars were evidence that would be on my daughter's body forever. One afternoon, while Jade was at the school, I decided to go through her room more carefully. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for anything else that might help the legal case. Under her mattress, I found a small notebook with a purple cover. I opened it and realized it was a journal where Jade had documented some of what Bethany did to her. She'd written down dates and specific incidents. March 15th, Bethany made me clean the garage until midnight because I didn't fold the towels the right way. March 22nd, the boys spilled juice on purpose and laughed while I cleaned it up. April 3rd, Bethany said I couldn't eat dinner until everyone else finished and then there wasn't any food left. Reading it broke my heart. My 14-year-old daughter had been keeping this record like she knew someday someone might need proof. I took photos of every page and sent them to Matthew. He called me an hour later and said this was powerful evidence because it showed Jade was aware this treatment was wrong and felt trapped. He said we'd submit it as part of our case file. The journal proved this wasn't normal discipline that Jade misunderstood. This was abuse that she recognized as abuse but couldn't escape from. Bethany's parents called my cell phone on a Saturday morning. I almost didn't answer because I didn't recognize the number, but then I figured it might be important. Her father started yelling at me before I could even say hello. He demanded to know why I was destroying their daughter's life over normal discipline. He said Bethany was a devoted mother who only wanted the best for all the children, and I was making up lies to turn people against her. I tried to explain the severity of what happened. I told him about the hospital admission, the chemical burns, the weight loss, the sleeping on the laundry room floor. He cut me off and said I was exaggerating teenage drama, that kids these days were too soft and needed to learn responsibility. He said his generation had chores growing up and it didn't hurt them. I told him there was a difference between chores and forcing a sick child to work until she collapsed. He said I was coaching Jade to lie, that Bethany would never do the things I was claiming. Her mother got on the phone and said almost the same things. They refused to believe any of it. They said Bethany had always been a wonderful mother, and I was clearly the problem. I realized then that Bethany's family was going to support her no matter what evidence existed. They would twist reality to match their view of their daughter. I needed to protect Jade from their attempts to contact her or convince her she was wrong about what happened. I blocked both their numbers after the call ended. Then I called Jade's school and told the front office that only I was authorized to pick her up or receive information about her. I gave them a list with just my name and my mom's name on it. I explained there was a custody situation and that no one else should be allowed access. The secretary said she'd put a note in Jade's file and alert all her teachers. Over the next few weeks, I noticed Jade was eating more at meals. She'd always finish what was on her plate now instead of picking at it. She asked for seconds sometimes. I could see her face filling out a little, her clothes fitting better. At her Thursday session with Diane, she told me something that made me want to cry. She said she'd been restricting herself even when food was available because Bethany had trained her to believe she didn't deserve to eat until everyone else was satisfied. She said even after Bethany left, part of her brain still thought she needed permission to take food. Diane was helping her recognize those thoughts and push back against them. She was learning that she deserved to eat when she was hungry, that food wasn't something she had to earn through labor. I was sitting at the kitchen table 3 days later when Kevin knocked on the door. He looked uncomfortable, kept shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He told me he saw Bethany drive by the house twice last week, once on Tuesday afternoon, once on Thursday morning. She slowed down both times, stared at the house like she was checking to see if anyone noticed. Kevin said he wrote down the dates and times because he figured I'd need them. I thanked him and called the police non-emergency line right away. An officer came out that afternoon to take my report. He listened to everything, checked the restraining order details on his computer, and documented both incidents Kevin witnessed. He said they'd contact Bethany with a formal warning that any further violations would result in immediate arrest. He explained that driving by once could be accidental, but twice in 3 days showed a pattern of intentional contact attempts. I felt relieved knowing it was on record now, that there were consequences waiting if she tried it again. 2 days after that, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. A woman introduced herself as the school counselor at the twins' elementary school. She said she needed to speak with me about concerns regarding the boys' behavior and their home environment. I told her I wasn't their legal guardian anymore and suggested she contact CPS instead. She said she already had, but wanted me to know what was happening since I'd been involved in their lives. She explained that Grayson had been bullying younger kids on the playground. He'd been making them carry his backpack, fetch things for him, clean up his lunch area. When teachers confronted him, he said his mom taught him that some people exist to serve others. The counselor said those exact words came out of a 12-year-old's mouth, and it alarmed every adult who heard it. The school had documented multiple incidents over the past 2 weeks. Linus hadn't been bullying anyone, but he'd been standing by watching Grayson do it without intervening or telling teachers. The counselor said she was mandated to report this to CPS as potential evidence of harmful parenting practices in the home. Courtney called me the next morning. She said CPS was now investigating Bethany's treatment of her own children based on the school's report and everything they'd learned from Jade's case. The things Grayson was saying and doing at the school suggested he'd been taught a disturbing value system at home. Courtney explained they were looking into whether the boys were being raised in an environment that normalized abuse and servitude. She said if the investigation found evidence of harmful parenting, the boys might be removed from Bethany's care and placed with relatives or in foster care. She asked if I had any relatives on Bethany's side who might be suitable placements. I gave her the contact information for Bethany's parents, even though I knew they'd probably defend her. Courtney thanked me and said she'd keep me updated since the cases were connected through Jade. I hung up and sat there feeling twisted up inside. Part of me wanted those boys away from Bethany because I'd seen what her parenting did to Jade. But another part of me remembered them laughing while Jade scrubbed floors, remembered them demanding midnight snacks and enjoying watching her suffer. They were 12 years old, and they'd treated my daughter like property. I knew they were victims of Bethany's teaching, that kids learn what they're taught, but knowing that didn't erase the memory of their faces when they told me how Jade wasn't allowed to eat until they were done. I called Diane and asked for an emergency session because I couldn't sort through these feelings on my own. She fit me in that afternoon. I told her everything about the CPS investigation and how confused I felt about the boys. She listened without interrupting, then helped me understand that both things could be true at once. I could recognize they were victims of bad parenting, while also acknowledging the harm they caused Jade. She said feeling compassion for them didn't mean excusing what they did, and prioritizing Jade's healing didn't mean I was heartless toward them. She helped me see that the boys getting help now might prevent them from growing into adults who abuse others. That made it easier to accept whatever CPS decided. Jade found me in the living room that evening. She sat down on the couch next to me and asked if she'd have to see Bethany at the custody hearing. I wanted to lie and tell her no, but Diane had taught me that Jade needed truth even when it was hard. I told her she might have to testify about what Bethany did to her. I watched her face go pale and her hands start shaking. She asked if Bethany would be in the same room. I said yes, but that I'd be there too, and so would Matthew and probably Diane. I promised her that Bethany wouldn't be allowed to come near her or speak to her directly. Jade started crying and said she didn't think she could do it, that she couldn't look at Bethany and talk about everything that happened. I held her while she cried and told her I understood how scary it was. Then I called Diane right there and asked if she could work with Jade on preparation for testifying. Diane said she'd done this with other kids before, and she'd help Jade get ready. Matthew called later that night after I texted him about Jade's fear. He said he'd make the testimony process as easy as possible, that he'd object to any questions that were too harsh, and that the judge would be aware Jade was a minor victim testifying against her abuser. The next week, an envelope arrived from Bethany's lawyer. Inside was another settlement offer. They were suggesting supervised visitation with Jade in exchange for me dropping the abuse claims in the divorce proceedings. The letter said it would make everything go faster and be less traumatic for everyone involved. I read it twice to make sure I understood what they were asking. They wanted me to pretend the abuse never happened, so Bethany could see Jade again. I called Matthew immediately and read him the offer. He was quiet for a moment, then said we were rejecting it and he'd draft a response. He explained that dropping the abuse claims would mean no official record of what happened, which could affect future situations if Bethany tried to get custody or visitation rights later. He said the abuse happened, it was documented by medical professionals and CPS, and it needed to be on the legal record regardless of how long it made the divorce take. I agreed completely. Protecting Jade meant making sure everyone knew exactly what Bethany had done. Kevin stopped by again a few days later with information I didn't want to hear. He said Bethany had been talking to neighbors, telling them I'd had an affair, and that's why she'd been stressed and strict with Jade. She was painting herself as a wronged wife who'd maybe been too hard on her stepdaughter, but only because she was dealing with betrayal. Kevin said at least 3 families on our street had heard this story from her. I felt rage building in my chest because not only had she abused my daughter, now she was destroying my reputation with lies. I started to call Matthew, but he called me first, like he had a sixth sense for when I needed legal advice. I told him about Bethany's affair story. He said it was infuriating but also helpful to our case. He explained that her changing stories actually hurt her credibility. First, she claimed she was just teaching responsibility. Then she said Jade was exaggerating. Now she was blaming stress from an affair that never happened. He said judges notice when people keep changing their explanation for the same events. It meant she was scrambling for anything that might excuse her behavior. I took Jade to the grocery store on Saturday because we needed food, and I thought getting out of the house would be good for her. We were in the cereal aisle when I saw her freeze completely. Her face went white, and she started breathing fast and shallow. I followed her stare and saw a woman with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing jeans and a blue jacket. From behind, she looked exactly like Bethany. The woman turned, and it wasn't her at all, completely different face. But Jade was already having a panic attack. Her hands were shaking, and she kept saying she couldn't breathe. I put my arm around her and walked her straight out of the store, left our half-full cart right there in the aisle. Outside in the parking lot, I helped her sit on the curb and talked her through breathing slowly. It took 15 minutes before she could speak normally again. She apologized over and over for making a scene. I told her she had nothing to apologize for, that panic attacks were a normal response to trauma. But driving home, I realized this was going to take so much longer to heal than I'd hoped. Seeing someone who just looked like Bethany from behind had sent Jade into a complete meltdown. The trauma lived in her body now, not just her mind. Diane called me on Monday and suggested something new. She said Jade was making good progress in individual therapy, but she thought family therapy for just the two of us might help. She explained that we needed to rebuild trust and work through my guilt about missing the abuse signs. I'd been carrying so much guilt since the night I found Jade mopping the floor with a fever. Diane said that guilt was affecting how I interacted with Jade, that I was overcompensating in ways that might actually slow her healing. She suggested we start with twice-monthly sessions together. Our first joint session was scheduled for Thursday afternoon. We sat in Diane's office, Jade on one end of the couch and me on the other. Diane asked Jade what she needed from me to feel safe. Jade started crying and said she needed to know I wouldn't leave her again. Then she admitted something that broke my heart into pieces. She said when Bethany was abusing her, she thought if she told me what was happening, I might choose Bethany over her. She thought I'd be angry at her for ruining my marriage and my chance at happiness. She'd convinced herself that keeping quiet and enduring the abuse was better than risking me picking Bethany's side. I moved across the couch and held her while she sobbed. I told her I would always choose her, that nothing and no one would ever be more important than her safety and happiness. Diane helped us talk through how Bethany had used my grief over losing Jade's mom to manipulate both of us. The custody hearing date finally arrived 6 weeks after everything came out. I woke up early and made Jade her favorite breakfast, even though neither of us could eat much. We drove to the courthouse and met Matthew in the hallway outside the courtroom. He went over what would happen, explained the order of testimony, reminded Jade that she just needed to tell the truth in her own words. Diane arrived and sat with Jade while we waited. When they called us in, I saw Bethany sitting at a table with her lawyer. She looked at Jade with this sad expression like she was the victim. The judge called Jade to the witness stand. She was shaking so hard I could see it from across the room. The court reporter swore her in, and Matthew started with easy questions. "What's your name? How old are you? Where do you go to the school?" Then he asked her to describe what happened when I was away for work. Jade's voice was quiet but steady. She told the judge about the cleaning, the cooking, the laundry. She told him about sleeping on the laundry room floor because she was too tired to walk to her bedroom. She told him about not being allowed to eat until everyone else was done. She told him about being forced to work while she had a fever. She told him everything in her own words, exactly how it happened. I watched her courage and felt so proud, even as hearing the details again destroyed me. This was my daughter telling a judge how she'd been abused in my own house, and she was doing it with more strength than most adults could manage. Bethany's lawyer called her to the stand, and she walked up there with this expression on her face like she was the victim in all this. She took the oath and sat down, smoothing her skirt like she was at a job interview, instead of a custody hearing about child abuse. Her lawyer started with easy questions about how long we'd been married and how she'd tried to blend our families. Then he asked her to describe her approach to parenting and household responsibilities. She launched into this whole speech about teaching life skills and responsibility. Said she believed children needed structure and chores to prepare them for adulthood. Said I was too lenient with Jade after her mother died, and that Jade needed firm boundaries. She claimed Jade had been resistant to her authority from the start, and that she'd been trying to help Jade learn basic skills like cooking and cleaning that every teenager should know. Her lawyer asked about the specific allegations, and Bethany shook her head sadly. Said Jade had blown normal household chores completely out of proportion. Said she'd asked Jade to help with laundry and dishes, nothing more than any teenager should do. Said Jade was manipulating the situation because she didn't want a stepmother and wanted me all to herself. Matthew stood up for cross-examination, and I could tell from his face that he was ready. He asked Bethany to describe exactly what chores she'd assigned to Jade. She tried to keep it vague, talking about age-appropriate tasks and learning responsibility. Matthew pulled out Jade's journal and read specific entries. Asked Bethany if making a sick child clean 3 bedrooms while running a fever was age-appropriate. Asked her if forcing Jade to sleep on the laundry room floor was teaching responsibility. Asked her if restricting food until everyone else had eaten was a normal household rule. Bethany stumbled through answers that kept changing. First, she said those things never happened. Then she said Jade was exaggerating. Then she said Jade had been difficult and needed consequences. The judge interrupted and asked her directly why Jade had been working while sick with 102 fever. Bethany opened her mouth and closed it again. She tried to say something about Jade making a mess, but the judge cut her off, asked her if she'd taken Jade to the doctor when the school called about the fever. Bethany admitted she hadn't. Asked her if she'd given Jade medicine or let her rest. Bethany said she'd thought Jade was faking to get out of her responsibilities. The judge's face got hard when she said that. He asked if she truly believed a child would fake a documented fever high enough that the school nurse sent her home. Bethany didn't have an answer that made sense. She started crying and saying she'd only wanted to help, that she'd been overwhelmed trying to manage 3 children in a household. But the judge wasn't buying it. He called a recess and told both lawyers he wanted to review all the evidence before making his ruling. We waited in the hallway for 2 hours while the judge went through everything. Matthew said it was a good sign that he was being thorough. Jade sat next to me the whole time, not saying anything, just holding my hand. Diane stayed with us and kept Jade calm when she started getting anxious. Finally, the bailiff called us back in, and we all took our seats. The judge had a stack of papers in front of him, and he looked at Bethany first, then at me, then at Jade. He started by summarizing the evidence. Medical records showing Jade's weight loss, malnutrition, chemical burns, and untreated illness. The CPS report documenting the abuse and neglect. Kevin's witness statement about seeing Jade collapsed on the floor. The school counselor's concerns about Jade's declining grades and exhausted appearance. Jade's own testimony and her journal entries documenting months of forced labor. The judge said the evidence was overwhelming and consistent. He said Bethany's testimony had been contradictory and unconvincing, particularly her inability to explain why she'd forced a sick child to work instead of providing medical care. Then he announced his ruling. He said Bethany's treatment of Jade constituted abuse and neglect under state law. He granted me sole legal and physical custody of Jade effective immediately. He said Bethany would be allowed supervised visitation only, and that Jade had the right to refuse those visits given her age and the severity of the abuse. He ordered Bethany to complete parenting classes and therapy before any visitation could be considered. He also ordered her to stay at least 500 feet away from our home and Jade's school, except for court-ordered supervised visits. Bethany started sobbing when he said that. Her lawyer tried to argue that she shouldn't lose all contact with her stepdaughter, that it would damage their relationship permanently. The judge looked at Bethany and said she'd already damaged that relationship through her own actions. Said that Jade's safety and well-being were the priority, not Bethany's feelings. He asked Jade directly if she wanted any visitation with Bethany, even supervised. Jade looked at me first, then at the judge and said no. Said she didn't feel safe around Bethany and didn't want to see her. The judge nodded and said he was supporting Jade's decision. He told Bethany that she'd had a responsibility to care for Jade, and instead she'd exploited and abused her. Said that losing her stepdaughter was a consequence of her choices, and that she needed to accept that. Bethany kept crying, but the judge was done. He signed the custody order right there and handed it to Matthew. We left the courthouse and Bethany was still sitting at her table with her lawyer trying to calm her down. 3 months crawled by while the divorce was finalized. Matthew handled most of it so I didn't have to deal with Bethany directly. She tried to fight for the house and half of everything, but Matthew argued that she'd stolen from our joint account and taken my late wife's jewelry. The judge agreed and ordered her to return the money plus the jewelry or pay its appraised value. In the end, I got the house, sole custody of Jade and most of our assets. Bethany got her car and her personal belongings, and that was it. The divorce decree was signed the same week Jade started therapy twice a week instead of once. Courtney called me a few weeks after the custody hearing to update me on the twins. She said CPS had completed their investigation of Bethany's parenting and found concerns but not enough to remove the boys from her care. They were requiring her to take parenting classes and attend therapy, same as the custody order required. The boys were also seeing their own therapist now to work through what they'd been taught about treating Jade like a servant. Courtney said they'd be monitoring the situation closely, and that the boys' therapist would be reporting back to CPS regularly. I asked if the boys were okay, and Courtney said they were confused more than anything. Said they'd been taught that their behavior toward Jade was normal, and now they were learning it wasn't. She said it would take time for them to unlearn what Bethany had drilled into them, but their therapist was hopeful they could develop healthier attitudes. I felt bad for them, even though they'd participated in Jade's abuse. They were just kids who'd been taught wrong by their mother. Summer ended, and Jade started high school at a different school across town. We decided together that a fresh start somewhere nobody knew about what happened would be better for her. She was nervous the first day, kept asking me if she looked okay, and if people would like her. I told her she looked great, and that anyone would be lucky to be her friend. Dropped her off and watched her walk into the building with her new backpack, and I felt this mix of pride and worry that probably every parent feels on the first day of school. She came home that afternoon and said it had gone okay. Made one acquaintance in her English class, but mostly just observed and tried to figure out how things worked. Over the next few weeks, she settled in, and her grades were good. Her teachers sent home positive reports about her class participation and homework quality. It felt like she was finally getting to be a normal teenager instead of someone drowning under abuse and trauma. One Saturday morning a few months into the school year, I came downstairs and found Jade loading the dishwasher. My heart dropped into my stomach and I immediately worried she was falling back into old patterns. I asked her what she was doing and she looked confused. Said she was just cleaning up from breakfast. I must have looked panicked because she asked if something was wrong. I tried to explain that she didn't have to do chores, that I didn't want her to feel like she had to work. She got this look on her face like she understood and said we should probably talk to Diane about it. At our next therapy session, I brought it up, and Diane explained something that hadn't occurred to me. She said Jade was reclaiming household tasks as choices rather than forced labor. Said it was actually part of her healing process to do normal chores voluntarily because it proved to herself that she had control now. She could choose to load the dishwasher or not, could choose to fold laundry or not, and that choice was what mattered. She wasn't doing it because someone would punish her if she didn't. She was doing it because she wanted to contribute to our household on her own terms. That made sense when Diane explained it, but it was hard for me to watch without feeling anxious. Every time I saw Jade doing something around the house, I had to remind myself that she was choosing it freely. Diane said my reaction was normal given what we'd been through, but that I needed to trust Jade's healing process and not treat normal household participation like it was trauma. 6 months after everything came out, Jade came to me one evening while I was making dinner. She said she'd been thinking about the twins a lot and wanted to write them a letter. Said she wanted to explain that what their mom had taught them about treating people were wrong. I didn't know how to respond at first because I wasn't sure it was a good idea to have any contact with Bethany's family. But Jade said she needed to do it for herself, not for them. Needed to tell them that everyone deserves respect, regardless of family relationships or household roles. We talked to Diane about it at our next session, and she thought it was a healthy impulse. Said writing the letter would help Jade process her feelings about the twins and their role in her abuse. She offered to help Jade write it in a way that was clear, but not accusatory. Over the next few weeks, Jade worked on the letter during her therapy sessions. She focused on explaining that what happened to her wasn't normal, and that the twins had been taught harmful things by their mother. She said she hoped someday they'd understand that treating people like servants was wrong, even if the person doing it was your parent. When the letter was done, Jade asked me to mail it to Bethany's address for the boys. I did it even though I had no idea if Bethany would actually give it to them. Part of me doubted she would because it made her look bad. But Jade said it didn't matter if they got it or not. What mattered was that she'd said what she needed to say. I hoped someday those boys would understand they'd been taught harmful things and would choose to be different from their mother. For now, I focused on making sure Jade knew she was valued for who she was, not what she could do for others. We had family dinners where we talked about our days. We watched movies together on weekends. We took Biscuit for walks in the evening. Normal family stuff that Jade had been denied while Bethany was treating her like unpaid labor. Every time Jade smiled or laughed or just relaxed on the couch, I felt grateful that we'd made it through to the other side. One afternoon in late spring, Jade came home from the school more excited than I'd seen her in months. She said a girl named Riley had invited her to join the art club. Said they were working on a painting project for the end-of-year showcase, and Riley thought Jade would be good at it. I asked if she was going to do it, and she said yes, definitely. She talked through dinner about the project and what supplies she'd need, and how the art room had these huge windows that let in perfect light. I watched her face while she talked and saw genuine happiness there for the first time since before I'd married Bethany. She was excited about something that had nothing to do with trauma or recovery or legal proceedings. Just a normal teenage girl talking about an art project with a new friend. That night after she went to bed, I sat in the living room and felt something loosen in my chest that had been tight for over a year. We were going to be okay. Jade was going to be okay. And that was enough. A few weeks later, my mom called to say she was coming to visit. I hadn't seen her in almost 8 months because she lived 3 states away, and her health wasn't great for long drives. When she walked through the door and saw Jade, she stopped in the entryway and started crying. Jade looked confused and asked if she was okay, and my mom just pulled her into a hug and said she looked so healthy and happy compared to the last time she'd seen her. I realized my mom's last visit had been right in the middle of everything with Bethany, back when Jade was exhausted and thin and barely holding it together. My mom kept apologizing through tears, saying she should have visited more often, that maybe she would have noticed something was wrong if she'd been around more. I led her to the kitchen and made tea while Jade sat with her on the couch. My mom kept touching Jade's face and arms like she needed to make sure she was really okay. I told my mom that everyone missed the signs because Bethany was skilled at manipulation. She'd fooled me completely, fooled the school, fooled Kevin until he happened to look through the window at exactly the right moment. We couldn't change the past, but we could make sure Jade felt supported now. My mom stayed for the weekend and Jade soaked up her grandmother's attention. They baked cookies together and watched old movies, and my mom told stories about when I was Jade's age. It was the most relaxed I'd seen Jade in months, just being a normal teenager with her grandmother instead of carrying the weight of everything that had happened. At Jade's next appointment with Alonzo, he examined her hands and said the scarring was minimal. You could still see faint lines on her palms and fingers if you knew to look for them, but they'd healed better than he'd initially expected. He checked her weight and height and said she was back in the healthy range for her age. The malnutrition hadn't caused any permanent damage to her growth or development. I felt relief wash over me because I'd been worried that Bethany's abuse would leave lasting physical effects beyond just the emotional trauma. Alonzo said Jade was doing remarkably well considering what she'd been through. He scheduled a follow-up in 6 months just to make sure everything stayed on track. Diane told me in our next parents' session that Jade was making excellent progress in therapy. She developed good coping strategies for when she felt anxious or had flashbacks about the abuse. Diane taught her grounding techniques and ways to challenge the negative thoughts Bethany had planted in her head about being worthless or lazy. Jade still had hard days where the memories hit her and she'd get quiet or withdrawn, but those days were becoming less frequent and less intense. Diane said Jade was doing the work of processing her trauma in a healthy way instead of burying it or letting it control her. She thought Jade would continue to heal and that the worst of the acute trauma response was behind us now. My boss called me into his office one afternoon, and I braced myself for bad news about my reduced travel schedule. Instead, he told me the company was promoting me to a senior position that came with a significant raise. The role involved more strategy work and less client site visits, which meant I could stay remote most of the time. I almost laughed with relief because the promotion would help offset the pay cut I'd taken to work from home more. I could put real money into a college fund for Jade now and rebuild our financial stability. I took Jade out to dinner that night to celebrate, and she seemed genuinely happy for me. She said she was glad I didn't have to worry so much about money anymore. A few weeks later, Jade came to me with an idea. She wanted to know if we could adopt a dog. She'd been thinking about it for a while and thought having a pet might be good for her. I realized she was probably right, because a dog would give her something positive to focus on and a companion for when she was home alone. We spent a Saturday afternoon at the animal shelter looking at different dogs. Jade walked past the puppies and the energetic young dogs and stopped at a kennel in the back corner. Inside was an older golden retriever mix with gray around his muzzle. The shelter worker said his name was Biscuit, and his previous owner had died, leaving him without a home. Jade knelt down, and Biscuit came over to sniff her hand through the bars. She looked up at me with hope in her eyes, and I knew we were taking him home. Biscuit settled into our house like he'd always been there. He followed Jade everywhere and slept on a dog bed next to hers at night. I'd catch her talking to him while she did homework or reading out loud with him curled up next to her. He was exactly what she needed. 1 year after I discovered what Bethany was doing, Jade and I had a quiet evening at home. We'd ordered pizza and were watching a movie when Jade paused it and turned to me. She said she wanted to thank me for believing her and protecting her. She knew I felt guilty about not seeing the abuse sooner, but she was grateful I'd acted immediately once I knew the truth. She said a lot of kids in her support group at therapy had parents who didn't believe them or who chose their abusers over them. She felt lucky that I'd never doubted her or made excuses for Bethany. I felt my throat get tight because I did still carry guilt about missing the signs for so long, but hearing Jade say she felt protected and believed meant everything. I told Jade that she'd saved herself by surviving until I found out. Her strength amazed me every single day. We were both healing from what Bethany had done, me from the guilt, and her from the trauma itself. We'd never forget what happened because it was part of our story now, but we were building something better together. Something based on trust and respect and actual love instead of manipulation. Jade leaned against my shoulder and we finished the movie with Biscuit snoring at our feet. A few months later, Jade started talking about her future in a way she hadn't before. She said she was thinking about maybe becoming a therapist someday to help other kids who went through abuse. Diane encouraged this interest when Jade brought it up in their session. She told Jade that survivors often made the best advocates and counselors because they understood the experience from the inside. Diane suggested volunteer opportunities when Jade got older that might help her explore the field, like peer support groups or mentoring programs for younger kids in the foster system. I ran into Kevin at the hardware store one Saturday morning. He asked how Jade was doing and I told him she was thriving. She'd made friends at the school, joined the art club, adopted a dog, and was talking about becoming a therapist. Kevin smiled and said he was glad to hear it. I thanked him again for making that phone call a year ago. He'd saved my daughter's life by refusing to ignore what he'd seen through that window. Kevin waved off the thanks, but I could tell he was glad he'd acted on his instincts that day. We talked for a few more minutes about normal neighbor stuff before heading our separate ways, but I left that conversation feeling grateful that there were people like Kevin in the world who saw something wrong and actually did something about it. A few months later, Jade came home from the school and dropped her backpack on the kitchen counter with a huge smile on her face. She pulled out her report card and handed it to me without saying anything. I opened it and saw straight A's across every single subject. Her English teacher had written a note at the bottom saying Jade was a joy to have in class and always participated with thoughtful comments. Her math teacher wrote that she'd improved dramatically this semester and was helping other students during study groups. I felt my chest get tight reading those comments because just over a year ago, Jade had been failing classes and falling asleep at her desk from exhaustion. I walked to the fridge and used a magnet to stick her report card right in the center where we could both see it every day. Jade hugged me and said she'd worked really hard this semester. I told her I was incredibly proud of her and that she'd earned every single one of those grades through her own effort and determination. That night, I took her out for dinner at her favorite restaurant to celebrate, and watching her laugh and talk about her classes made me feel grateful beyond words that she'd gotten her life back. Over the next few weeks, Jade and I started building new routines that were just ours. Every Friday night became movie night where we'd order pizza and watch whatever film Jade picked out, even if it was something I'd normally never choose. She loved picking obscure horror movies or animated films, and I learned to appreciate her taste even when the movies were weird. Sunday mornings became pancake mornings where we'd both cook breakfast together, and Jade would experiment with different toppings and mix-ins. She made blueberry pancakes, chocolate chip pancakes, and once even tried bacon pancakes that were actually pretty good. These small traditions helped Jade feel secure because they were predictable and positive, something she could count on every single week. They also gave us happy memories to replace the awful ones from when Bethany lived with us. Biscuit always joined us for movie nights, sleeping on the couch between us, and he'd sit at our feet during Sunday breakfast hoping for dropped pancake pieces. These simple routines became the foundation of our new life together, built on actual care and respect instead of fear and control. I had a session with Diane without Jade present, where she updated me on my daughter's progress. Diane told me that Jade had processed the trauma remarkably well, considering how severe and prolonged the abuse had been. She said Jade had developed strong coping skills for managing anxiety and had worked through most of her guilt about not telling me sooner. Diane recommended reducing therapy sessions from weekly to twice monthly because Jade was doing so well and didn't need as much intensive support anymore. She credited Jade's natural resilience and the strong support system I built around her with her successful recovery. Diane said having immediate consequences for Bethany, getting medical care right away, and never doubting Jade's story had made a huge difference in how well she'd healed. She also mentioned that Jade had expressed interest in helping other abuse survivors someday, which Diane thought was a healthy way to find meaning in what she'd been through. I left that session feeling hopeful about Jade's future in a way I hadn't felt since before I married Bethany. 2 years after everything happened with Bethany, Jade turned 16 and had become a completely different person than the exhausted, scared girl I'd found mopping floors with a fever. She volunteered every Saturday at an organization that helped other kids who'd survived abuse, working with a peer support group for teenagers. She'd share parts of her own story when it helped other kids feel less alone, and she had this way of listening that made people trust her. The organization's director told me Jade was one of their most dedicated volunteers and had a natural gift for connecting with traumatized kids. Watching Jade turn her pain into purpose and use her experience to help others made me incredibly proud of the person she was becoming. Our life wasn't perfect because we still had hard days when Jade struggled with anxiety, or I felt guilty about missing the abuse signs for so long. But our life was ours. It was safe, and it was filled with genuine love and respect. Jade knew she mattered for who she was, not what she could do for other people, and that knowledge had changed everything for both of us.